but you are in time to join David Dimbleby and his team in the BBC election studio where he's waiting to introduce Decision 79.
Good evening. Well, it looks like being one of the most exciting election nights ever, with the possibility of a very close result and the prospect of Britain having its first woman Prime Minister at the end of the night. We'll be having the results from these screens from our computer. We'll be able, we hope, to analyse very quickly when the first results come in whether or not Mrs. Thatcher will make it. You'll be glad to know the computer has not ousted our old friend, the swingometer, and of course Robert Mackenzie will be here brandishing it and also talking about the political consequences of the decision the electorate has taken today. Angela Rippon will be analysing many of the results, but she'll also be giving a summary every hour for those of you who may have missed one or two important details as the night goes on. Beside me up here, a veteran of these election nights, David Butler, will be analysing the seats in detail and also the way the parties have done, which he's been doing since when, David?
Since 1950, and I'm just as much on edge now as I was then.
Well, it's not all going to be swings. We also have our roundabouts. Robin Day will have a variety of guests, politicians and commentators with him through the evening.
Good evening to you. Remember that tonight's programme is not only about the all-important national results. Behind the cold computer's flow of figures, behind the professor's percentages and swings, is the fate of individuals who've fought the good fight as they see it. It's not a horse race. It's a human drama and a night of history, but tremendous fun.
It's been a very curious campaign at the start of it. You remember the polls were suggesting that we might tonight be reporting, I suppose in one way we might still be reporting, a walkover for the Conservatives and Mrs. Thatcher. But the polls narrowed a good deal as it went on. It may be that we see a straight Tory victory, but it is possible that we could find the Tories not winning the 318 seats they need if they are automatically to form the next government. There's even an outside chance, depending on how the smaller parties do, perhaps, of Mr. Callaghan remaining at Downing Street, perhaps even as a leader of a coalition. Now, our cameras tonight are going to be at many of the important counts, at places like Devonport, where the Foreign Secretary is defending a majority of just over 2,000. He's the Cabinet Minister in the Labour government most at risk. We'll be at Leeds, where Sir Keith Joseph, Merlin Rees, Dennis Healey, all prominent politicians have their constituencies, and from where they'll be talking to us during the night. And we'll be at the most marginal seat of all, in Dunbarton East, where it needs only 12 voters to change their minds about the SNP for the XMP to fall, and where Conservative, Labour and SNP were all within a few hundred votes of each other at the last election. And then we'll be at Devon North, as Jeremy Thorpe, the former leader of the Liberal Party, discovers whether all the difficulties that he's been in mean that the Liberals there have turned against him. And in London at Putney, at one of the seats that the Tories are very much hoping to pick up, and also, incidentally, though it doesn't look like it at the moment, one of the earliest seats to be declared in the race to be first. Now, the polls have, as I said, varied enormously. There was a lead at the very beginning for the Tories of, what, over 20%, and then at one point a very slight Labour lead. So to explain how they all worked out at the end of the day and what they mean for tonight, here's Robert Mackenzie.
Well, we start with our dear old friend, the swingometer, which will be later taken over by the calculations of the great machine, Rover. But this gives us a rough idea of the job Mrs. Thatcher has to unseat the government. We start from October 74 result, Labour 3-seat overall majority. Mrs. Thatcher has to get not just a 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%, 4.5% swing. 4.5 people out of 100 net have to change from Labour to Conservative to give her something like a 20-seat majority. Now, what are the polls saying? Tonight, you compute all the polls together, they're saying she's likely to get something like a 4.7% swing. I said she needs 4.5. She's, according to the polls, getting 4.7. So this just suggests a bare Tory win. But let me warn you, the polls have been more wrong than right in each of the last 3 elections. So not until the real poll is counted do we know what happens. David.
Now, as these results start coming in, our computer is going to give us a prediction of the outcome that's based on a mass of information fed into it of past voting habits, of the makeup of constituencies and that sort of thing. I must come clean about it. At the moment, it has only information, of course, from polling, including some we've ourselves done today in a couple of marginal seats. And on this basis, at the moment, this is the kind of picture that it's predicting. We think that Labour will be somewhere between 269 and 293, not enough, of course, that is, to form the next government. We think the Conservatives will be between 315 and 339, on the whole looking fairly likely to be over that 318 mark they need to get. The Liberals anywhere between 5 and 13, you can make of that what you will. 13 would have them only one below what they are now. The SNP between 1 and 5, and the others between 12 and 18. That's our view at 10 o'clock, and it's just at the point when the polls close. Now, I say it rather hesitantly because it's by no means a firm prediction, but after we've had half a dozen or so results in, we will get a firm prediction, and we should then be able to stick with that and see how it alters through the night. It should be fairly clear. All of the three main party leaders in this campaign were fighting their first general election as leader, and they were very much the focal points of the campaign. They were always on the television screen, whether they were making speeches or whether they were actually meeting the occasional voter, usually surrounded by a horde of pressmen. Well, tonight we have a reporter with each of them. Michael Charlton is going to be following Mrs. Thatcher, and he's down there at Flood Street in Chelsea. Michael?
Well, this is Mrs. Thatcher's house at Flood Street in Chelsea, which has been her home for about 10 years, not far from the Thames and from Westminster. And I can tell you that she's in the small upstairs sitting room on the first floor here, quite possibly watching the box, and that there's little in that room to suggest that its occupant leads an important political life. I'm told that there are no signed photos, those signed photos which the great trade union of political leaders like to exchange with one another. And the only other thing I know is that there was a green carpet on the floor, because in the last general election in 1974, while Mrs. Thatcher was out on the stump, the burglars got in here, and she bought the carpet to replace the things which were pinched, in the belief that if they came back again, it would be harder to nick the carpet next time. Anyway, she looks to be in safe hands here tonight, as you can see. You alert, Constable? He's being vigilant. Well, now, we're going to see Mrs. Thatcher later on. The only other thing I can tell you is that there's no change in her condition. She remains buoyant, and as she told us yesterday, cautiously confident that she is going to win. So I can invite you only to imagine the suspense that she's going through in that upstairs room before she knows whether she's going to be the first woman in all the long line of prime ministers since Walpole to be placed at the head of affairs of this country, or whether, to put it more brutally, the road won't lead from here to Downing Street, but back here to number 19 Flood Street for her tonight, because it's a once and for all chance for her. This is Michael Charlton in Flood Street.
Well, those of you who've watching us further north than here and who've been having sleet and snow may envy the cherry blossom and the daffodils out. It's been rather a lovely day in London. Well, with the Prime Minister during the whole of this campaign has been Michael Cockerell, and tonight he's with him too at Cardiff.
Tonight, this is the seat of the British government, the Grand Edwardian City Hall in Cardiff. I'm here in his parlour with the Lord Mayor, who's the returning officer. Just down the corridor, the Prime Minister, his Downing Street staff and special branch detectives have taken over a suite of offices and installed a government hotline. Mr. Callaghan is expected here at midnight. He's been resting at his hotel after a special election day menu of iced wedgie of melon, Conservative consommé, sautéed left wing of chicken, and coffee Cardiff South East. Last time, Mr. Callaghan had a majority of 10,000, but this time it could be different. At the last moment, the Liberal candidate withdrew and told the 8,000 Liberal voters to support the Conservatives. But this morning, the Prime Minister told me he was relaxed, rejuvenated and confident. When I asked him how long he would remain Prime Minister if he wins, he said, for the full term of another Parliament. Remember, they call me Moses, not Methuselah. This is Michael Cockerell in Cardiff South East.
Can't remember how long Methuselah lasted. The man whose quiet campaign seems, by any standards, to have met with increasing public approval during the election is David Steele. And he's in his constituency, he's actually at Selkirk tonight, waiting to see whether he achieves what he wanted, which was a wedge, you remember he called it, of 20 or more Liberal MPs to restrain, in his words, the extremists in both major parties. Now, Philip Tibbenham is up there in Selkirk and will be following him.
Well, frankly, we're not expecting any sensation here at Selkirk. Indeed, I don't know what David Steele did have for dinner, but if he didn't get re-elected here, I think we'd all fall off this balcony. That wouldn't be too difficult, actually. What is important, as David has just said, is that he gets that wedge of MPs which will keep the major parties in check. And following his strategy of concentrating on selected constituencies, he was still talking today about something between 20 and 50 seats. In the little town of Melrose, just up the road today, he stepped off his battle bus and almost went into a betting office and appeared to be thinking about putting on a bet, but of course he didn't. And as the night wears on, we shall find out whether he was right or wrong not to put on that fiver or whatever it was. This is Philip Tibbenham in Selkirk.
A newcomer to our election coverage tonight is our specially built results computer. And Angela Rippon has the details of what it can do. Angela?
Well, it's the most sophisticated of television computers, capable of painting pictures and charts that are quite different from anything you've seen on the screen before. It's also fast. Within half a second of a result being fed in, it'll be ready to show it to you at home. Well, of course, there are no results yet, but what we do have are some of the results of a very special survey conducted for us yesterday and today by Gallup polls. All over Britain, voters were asked which party they thought had the best policies. Now, their answers gave the Conservatives a slightly greater lead than they've been receiving in most of the recent opinion polls. In this survey, 46% preferred Conservative policies, 37% Labour, and 17% the Liberals. But when they were asked who would make the best Prime Minister, well, then their preferences switched round. On this question, Labour came out much better. 42% preferred Mr Callaghan, 34% Mrs Thatcher, and a very high 24% Mr Steele. Indeed, a feature of this survey so far has been the very good showing by Mr Steele and the Liberals, a reflection perhaps of the campaign that he's been conducting. And on this chart, you can see just how Mr Steele's personal popularity has grown through the campaign, leading up to that 24% who today think that he would make the best Prime Minister. David.
It always used to be, you remember, Guildford, Cheltenham or Billericay, when Billericay was a constituency, that were in the race to declare first. Now tonight, it might well be Glasgow Central, because the whole of England and Wales, except for London that is, had 2 elections today. And they have to sort out, first of all, the white from the grey ballot slip. And I might say David Butler himself got his muddled when he voted, before the counting can actually start. Guildford hopes to be in with a chance, and Frank Boff, recovered from his appendicitis, is down there. Frank, when do you think Guildford's going to get their result to us?
Well, we reckon, David, about 12:15 or 12:30. They're very competitive down here because they have declared first here in Guildford in both elections in 1974, and indeed the first box has arrived at 4 minutes past 10 from the polling station in the Guildhall, which is just down here from the Civic Hall. There are going to be complications and delays, of course, because here we do have to sort out those 2 polling tickets that you were talking about, and we have heard 1 or 2 reports from polling stations in the constituency that 1 or 2 of the old biddies have had a little bit of trouble sorting out the fact that in the district elections, of course, they can vote for 2 or 3 candidates, whereas in the parliamentary election, they can only vote for 1. So we're expecting 1 or 2 delays, and the returning officer, Eric Twyford, is expecting to deal with 1 or 2 queries. So we reckon round about 12:15, 12:30.
Thanks very much. And I think at Upminster, there's Bob Wellings. Upminster's entered the stakes for the first time, Bob, this year.
Yes, it has. And unlike my colleague Frank Boff at Guildford, we haven't the complication, of course, of local elections. But the picture, I have to tell you, before you, is one of expectancy. I mean, Frank mentioned that one of the boxes had arrived 10 minutes ago. No boxes have yet arrived. The expectation of declaration is, just like Frank Boff, is between 12 and 12:30, but going on past form, it could be about 12:20. That's the intimation. Turnout, they're great voters here, very dedicated voters on past performance, and it's thought to be a very heavy poll.
Well, I just hope that we are at the first count. But however quick it is, and whoever wins the race to be the first to declare, I promise you that nothing at all will happen during the next hour at least, which is a rash kind of promise, but there'll be no results or anything happen for the moment. So for 45 minutes, we can enjoy something that's been taboo during the election campaign, which you may feel we could all do with, I certainly do, which is a little mild fun at the expense of politicians. I hope you'll join us again at 5 to 11.